friends in UK, Europe, USA, Canada, Switzerland, and the rest of the world with our safe, secure, fast, and convenient service that offers you the largest selection of payout locations in the Gambia. Supersonics Money Transfer. We are currently in 34 African countries and counting, giving you quality money remittance services that are second to none. Visit the Google Play Store or the Apple Store today to download the Supersonics Money Transfer app and enjoy excellent money transfer services only with Supersonics.
Physiotherapy and Rehabilitation Clinic is the first of its kind in the Gambia. We have inpatient service and outpatient services. Penmore admits patients and they have intensive rehabilitations. That means treatment 3 times a day for 5 days, from Mondays to Friday, and on Fridays they go to their families to spend time with them to have family. Outpatients come on regular appointments, probably 2 or 3 times in a week for treatment. We treat patients with arthritis, with back pain, stroke patients, fractures or after fracture operation, paralysis of all types, and we do treat both young and old patients. Penmore Physiotherapy gives quality physiotherapy treatments to Gambians because we are qualified physios from different parts of the world.
To be joined by all of you today. And in our midst, first of all, I would like to introduce my beloved mother, who is with us here in the room today. I'd like to send special greetings to her and to commend her for her tenaciousness and steadfastness in, all through this process of, transitioning from being with my dad to a single mother and raising us all into very fine young men and women that we are. Going further, I'll also do the welcoming and introduction and open the floor to do the welcoming and opening remarks that would be done by the chair of the National Human Rights Commission. But before going further and before doing that, I'll first of all, as a formal welcome and introductory statement, I will first of all give a rundown of the Solo Sandeng Foundation and what we have been doing and the motive of our founding. So the Solo Sandeng Foundation was founded in April 14, 2017, 1 year after the fateful day of April 16, 2016, which was the last day as a family we saw our father. And for this country, it was a day which actually saw the start of the end of a dictatorship, a very brutal dictatorship that has gripped this country for 22 years. And that year, we saw the end of that dictatorship through continuous agitation and outright actions in the streets of Serekunda and Banjul. All through 8 months until the elections happened that year. So it is in this vein that the Solo Sandeng Foundation was founded. After 1 year of the death and disappearance of our beloved father, Mr. Solo Sandeng. And our foundation really is a very multi-focused institution that aims to propagate and continue the legacies of the late Mr. Solo Sandeng, who was a very remarkable figure, both socially and politically, and has involved in a lot of social and social work and voluntary work, in all of his lifetime. So, the Solo Sandeng Foundation aims to propagate these legacies and continue, advocacy and voluntary work in all of these areas. So today we commemorate 6 years after the peaceful protest and the disappearance of Mr. Solo Sandeng and the torture and maiming of all of his colleagues, who some continue to live with great ailments until today. I mean, that was a life-changing encounter for a lot of them. So this foundation seeks to propagate Solo Sandeng's legacies by continuous advocacy and service to mankind, and especially the Gambian people in the areas of education. And we also hope to propagate his legacies through the agitation or advocacy, and also, in sort of electoral reforms, which was really one of the things that, the main thing that was the cause of his arrest and detention and subsequent death. And so this foundation has been active in the transitional justice process in this country since 2017, in areas like sensitization, obviously, and also advocating for the welfare of many of these victims that were part and victimized, as a result of the event of April 14 and other subsequent events that followed. And so for that reason, the Solo Sandeng Foundation has been active in the transitional justice process. And one of our recent activities was the Reparations Program, which I'd like to highlight to say...
Recording in progress.
Which I'd like to highlight to say that was one of our most recent programs where we, in partnership with our fellow CSOs in the country, tried to sensitize and sensitize victims and basically the whole population around the issues of reparations in the transitional justice, the TRRC process. This intervention saw, members of our foundation and other partners going around the whole country to really sensitize people on some of the transitional justice issues, especially on reparations on the TRRC. We did not only stop there, we have always participated in all of the all activities in the transitional justice process. And today, we call this meeting with stakeholders from various institutions, government institutions, and obviously civil society organizations as well, to start a discussion around how do we implement TRRC recommendations on security sector reforms as a way and a recipe to serve the ideals of a better society by really implementing some of these recommendations that are in the TRRC report. Without doing much, I will just like to stop there and actually invite Mr. Emmanuel Daniel Juve, NHRC Chair, to do the opening statement. Thank you.
Everybody, I must say that I am honored to have been requested to make the opening remarks. On behalf of the Solo Sandeng family, relatives, friends, wife, children, well-wishers, and in collaboration with the National Human Rights Commission and support from USAID and Freedom House, the Institute for Human Rights and Development, I welcome you all to this hybrid stakeholders' convergence to commemorate a very important event dedicated to the life of a martyr, the late Solo Sandeng, whose life was brutally cut short by a dictator for merely exercising his fundamental rights and freedom, a fundamental right that is entrenched in our own 1997 Constitution. The theme of this commemoration is implementing the TRRC recommendations, a recipe to discouraging police brutality. Ladies and gentlemen, the late Solo Sandeng, we've had the introductory statement from the late Solo Sandeng's son, was a father, a husband, an uncle, a brother, and at the time he was also the National Organizing Secretary of the United Democratic Party. And he died in detention shortly after his arrest for participating in a peaceful protest. Mr. Solo Sandeng, the late Solo Sandeng, it was on a Thursday afternoon. Incidentally, today is also Thursday, 14th April 2016, when he embarked on a peaceful demonstration in Serekunda with some of his colleagues holding placards and banners requesting for electoral reforms. He and his fellow demonstrators had no weapons on them, nor was the demonstration a violent protest. The protest was dispersed by police who arrested several people, including the late Solo Sandeng and other UDP supporters. The information from Amnesty International at the time is that those arrested were taken to Mile 2 prisons and later to the National Intelligence Agency for interrogation. Although the death of Mr. Sandeng is currently sub judice under judicial consideration because of ongoing prosecution in the High Court, and therefore restrictions are made about its public discussion. It is, however, a fair assumption, based on Amnesty International and eyewitness reports, that Mr. Solo Sandeng died a violent and brutal death as a result of him exercising his right to freedom of association, his right to freedom of assembly, his right to freedom of expression, his right to belong to a political party of his choice, and his right to demonstrate against what he perceived were unjust laws. Ladies and gentlemen, freedom of expression, association, assembly, and the right to demonstrate are all fundamental rights and freedoms which are guaranteed in our Constitution and under international and regional human rights treaties and conventions that the Republic of the Gambia ratified over the years. Sadly, the Gambia for over 2 decades was under dictatorship that turned law and order institutions like the feared NIA at the time, the police services, especially the PIU unit, the prison services, the immigration services, and even the customs into accomplices of all the heinous crimes that was directed and committed by the then regime against Gambians. The key rule of law institutions, as a matter of fact, the judiciary, which is supposed to be the chief guardian of the rule of law in any democratic and free country, has its powers usurped and commandeered through the use of threats, coercion, and the appointment of mercenary judges, and with the assistance and connivance, unfortunately, of some of our own legal profession members, and thus rendering the judiciary an appendage of the rogue regime at the time. The decisions of the judiciary was also directed and dictated by the beck and call of ex-President Jammeh, especially when he had an interest in a matter. The Gambia at the time was in effect a police state, and people were arrested in the dead of night, tortured, detained, and even killed. The general arrogance and attitude towards ordinary Gambians by security personnel, namely the military, the police, especially the PIU, could be felt throughout the country at the time. Ladies and gentlemen, the TRRC ended its public hearing in May 2021, following 3 years of public sittings, and it examined 193 witness testimonies. And as per the Act, it submitted its report to His Excellency the President, Adama Barrow, on the 25th of November 2021, which contained 427 findings and 218 recommendations. On the 24th of December 2021, 1 month after the report was handed to the government, through the Ministry of Justice, held a press conference where the TRRC report was officially launched, and electronic copies were distributed to the public on its website, and also hard copies given to some institutions. In May of this year, which would be 6 months following the date of submission of the report to the President, the government is expected to issue a white paper containing its proposed plan on the implementation of the Commission's report. For those of you who had a chance to peruse through the report itself, you will discover that it touched on various aspects of human rights violations, with recommendations on criminal liability of human rights violation and abuses, issues on reparation, reconciliation, and most importantly, institutional reforms. It also talked about amnesty, memorialization, and the role of the National Human Rights Commission in monitoring of the recommendations. All this is geared to get to the bottom of what happened in the past and to make sure that through appropriate strategies, never again will we allow it to happen in this country, what has happened. If one looks at the volumes of the TRRC, especially volume 8, 13, 14, and 15, relating to institutional hearings, one will find revelations about the role that security personnel played in the human rights abuses. Indeed, reading and watching the testimonies, one quickly realizes that torture and inhumane treatment and punishment and even death was meted out to those who were perceived as enemies of the system, of the state, and of the then President Yahya Jammeh. The TRRC has therefore come up with a myriad of recommendations to make sure that never again should we go down that path, and therefore it proposed reforms and recommendations for our security personnel. Incidentally, security sector reform was part of the package of the transitional justice arrangement and process, which was envisaged in 2017. Unfortunately, the security sector reform is perceived by many as ineffective and on a snail pace. Moreover, there is great concern about the police heavy-handedness and the excessive use of force on the public, as evidenced in recent video footages and from individual complaints made to the National Human Rights Commission of the Gambia by members of the public. Although there have been capacity building initiatives for the police and the prison services through the assistance of development partners and also the National Human Rights Commission, and some of these training were geared towards mainstreaming human rights in the work of the police. The National Human Rights Commission had assisted the police to even come up with a code of conduct in the way it does its work. Having said that, there is much that needs to be done for us to attain the never again mantra of the TRRC. Ladies and gentlemen, no one is underestimating the importance and role of a police service in a country in view of their crucial mandate and functions as provided for in section 178 of the 1997 Constitution of the Gambia and section 4 of the Police Act. The police are authorized by law to protect life and property, apprehend offenders, investigate crimes, and prosecute crimes which are summary in nature, and generally to maintain law and order in society. I think we all know and we all appreciate that without an effective and efficient police force, we risk a breakdown in law and order and a society and country where anarchy will reign. That said, however, The police are supposed to carry out their duties in accordance with law and due process. And in the very rare instances where force has to be used, it has to be reasonable, proportionate, and measured. And as always, maximum restraint must always be exercised. The TRRC report contains key recommendations directed at security personnel, including but not limited to more stringent recruitment and screening processes for the security and prison service personnel. Mandatory courses for all security personnel, especially soldiers and the police, on human rights and their role in a democratic society. I will just want to quickly address something which is of great importance, and especially also in the context in which we are talking. That is, in the case of policing public assemblies and rallies relating to the police, there are set guidelines that have been made and recommended by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights and the UN, which today are the guiding principles that must be adhered to by the police. And the National Human Rights Commission has taken the police on it to make sure that they adhere to these guidelines. And regarding policing assemblies generally, peaceful assemblies should be facilitated wherever possible, and the enforced dispersal of public assembly should only take place as a measure of last resort when violence occurs or when there is an imminent threat of violence. The policing of public assemblies, is a particular activity that requires different skills and abilities from routine policing. In particular, it requires the balancing of competing interests and rights, and it is therefore important that police officers are well trained in both human rights and crowd management principles. The use of force by the police should always be regulated by domestic law. The use of force at an assembly should be proportionate and kept to the minimum level necessary. Any use of force should comply with international standards, including the United Nations Basic Principles on the use of force and firearms by law enforcement officials. The African Commission, in Resolution 281, urged states, and Gambia is a member state, to refrain from arbitrary arresting and detaining demonstrators, as well as from the disproportionate use of force against demonstrators. The use of force should be restricted to exceptional instances and be strictly carried out in accordance with international human rights law. In particular, the use of force should satisfy the principles of necessity and proportionality. The right to assemble and to demonstrate, ladies and gentlemen, is an integral to democracy and human rights. Even if acts of violence occur during such events, participants retain their rights to bodily integrity and other rights, and force may not be used except in accordance with the principles of necessity and proportionality, and firearms may never be used simply to disperse an assembly. The other principles that has been set out by the UN and the African Commission is that a police presence needs to be proportionate to the situation. So, for example, the police might be deployed in larger numbers than appear necessary to be deployed, wearing protective clothing or riot gear, and it should not be in a manner that appears confrontational, to serve or to intimidate the protesters. Number 10, good practices suggest that a process of dialogue and negotiation should be used to deal with any problems at assemblies, and that the police should maintain contact with the assembly organizers throughout the event to ensure that emerging problems or difficulties are dealt with swiftly before they can become serious and require aggressive intervention. Ladies and gentlemen, states must adopt and implement rules and regulations on the use of force by their officials. The legal and administrative framework must regulate all circumstances surrounding and relating to the use of force as to who, when, and how. We all agree that we are coming from an era where human rights was systematically abused by our security personnel. We cannot regress to what was, and it therefore behoves on all of us, that is the duty bearers, the executive, the police, to respect, protect, and fulfill
Recording in progress.
the rights of anyone living within the jurisdiction. And for the right holders, that is us, ordinary citizens, people in the Gambia, that we should, as right holders, also understand that we too have responsibilities to keep the peace and to be law-abiding, and when aggrieved, to also resort to the courts and other institutions to redress our grievances and not take the law into our own hands. We are in it together. We should all create a better society. And ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Sandeng Foundation, I thank you all for making, and I hope we'll have a very fruitful presentations and interaction. I thank you all.
Speakers from these institutions, the National Human Rights Commission, Mr. Jiba, and also Mr. Kimbeng Tar, the representative of the Attorney General and Minister of Justice Chambers. Without doing much, Fatima will be joining us through via Zoom. And Fatima, I believe you are ready. So we continue, we with intervals have these technical issues, and we'll just sort them out and get into Fatima's speech. The very stakeholders who will participate in the implementations of the TRRC recommendations, especially around security sector reform. You cannot have a reformed security sector without involving the Ministry of Interior and the police as well. So we will have presentations from all of the representatives of these institutions. And I am happy that the Ministry of Interior is able to join us in the person of Mr. Jiba. As we sort out I think Fatima is already here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I would not delay much of any further. I think the internet is trying to give us some little problems. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. It's indeed an honor to have you all attend Sandeng Foundation's stakeholder convergence and, of course, conversation on security sector reforms, which we deem very necessary and important that we hold this conversation, start a conversation, start talking and seeing what to do about the security sector and security sector reforms. And thanks to the institutions that are here today. I am supposed to honor the victims of survivors of April 14, 2016. I would like to start off by saying that April 14, 2016 was not a particular person's day. It was a Gambian day. It was a day that selfless Gambians gave up their lives. Possibly they knew they were not going to go home, but they gave it up for Gambia, and Gambians would see that day as such. A person can be affiliated to a party or to a group, like we all have families, but the most important thing for April 16 is that it was to liberate Gambia, and it was done for Gambia. I would like to highlight that so it is seen that way. So I'll just come on with my little speech that I put together. Even though my emotions are all over the place, I have realized that today is not a day to cry. Rather, it is a day to show gratitude to the few who sacrificed all for our motherland, the Gambia. 6 years ago today, when not many imagined that a person could stand up to Yahya Jammeh in the streets with a bullhorn and a banner saying, "Enough, Gambia deserves better," these few fearless men and women did so. We need proper electoral reforms, they wrote and chanted. Many looked at them and concluded, as they marched the streets of Serekunda towards Westfield, these people have a dead wish.
These people have a death wish. But did they? Yes, they had a wish, but surely it was not to die, but to free Gambia from the claws of dictatorship. However, there was a man who was ready to give it all, a man who was ready to stand alone even if everyone else was to leave. In his own words, and I quote, "If I have to be the sacrificial lamb for Gambia to be free, then so be it." Ibrahim Solo Sandeng, you promised and delivered. Now it is Gambia's turn to deliver. I know you did not sacrifice yourself for gains, not for recognition. You stood your ground, endured the painful torture meted out to you on that fateful day, took all the blame and said, "Kill me if you have to." And that they did. This undoubtedly will remain the worst day of my life, our lives. I still imagine how much pain they must have inflicted on my strong man who barely says, "I am sick" or tired. I cannot know how it felt exactly, but I feel how it felt even today. I wish I could have taken a cane, making it one less for you. Thank you, Ba. Thank you, Falan Sonko, Nogo Njai, Fatou Kamara, Ibrahima Janko Sise, Lang Marong, Kafu Bayo, Modungom, and all the April 14 victims and survivors. Gambia owes you. Thank you.
The fact that it is not mistaken for selfish endeavor. My father was very passionate about the welfare of everybody around him. In fact, every human everywhere in the world. And so it is no surprise that a man like that would go to an extent to give up his life for the lives of all of us in this room and beyond. And for that, I remain grateful and indebted to the sacrifices of such a great man. And going further on our, the next speaker we would have, and on the topic, the TRRC's recommendations on security sector reforms, is Mr. Kimbeng Tar. Mr. Tar will be taking us through TRRC recommendations on security sector reforms. But before we go further, I will also like to thank and acknowledge my siblings who are joining us today and continue to join us on any other day to remember our father, and also for their steadfastness in this dream to further propagate the legacies of our beloved father. Aminata, Jainaba, and the rest of you, thank you for always being on our side. Thank you.
Our democracy began to rise at the same time. So it's an honor for me to be here representing the Ministry of Justice in this very important occasion. The chairman has discussed extensively on the findings of the TRRC. Obviously, TRRC was set up to investigate the events ranging from 1994 to 2017 and to establish a historical record of all the atrocities that were meted out on Gambians by the regime of former President Jammeh. Before the TRRC even began, security sector reform was high on the agenda. Because we all realized that when you look at the history of Gambia between 1994 and 2017, the security services were intricately involved in most of the atrocities that were committed, at the behest of former President Jammeh, very likely given his own background as a military man. The TRRC obviously dug very deep into the issues of the security services and the involvement in the happenings over those years, and made a number of recommendations which they believe will help in resolving the issue and taking Gambia away from that very dark history. But in addition to the recommendations made by the TRRC, there are also initiatives that have been taken up by the government to ensure that while the TRRC recommendations may not be comprehensive, the government also needs to take a step to address some of the issues we have with the security sector. One of the most important things that we have to realize when we're looking at security sector reform, especially violence, is not just targeting the security sector, but also looking at a national culture of violence, because our security men are not aliens. They didn't come from Guinea or Mali. They came from amongst us. They are our brothers. When they take off the uniforms at night, they are your husbands, they are our wives, they are our daughters and our mothers. So if we address the issue of violence in the country as a whole, and how do we constructively channel our grievances, then it's undoubted that that will trickle down to our security forces. Just 1 second, sorry. There's no doubt that that will trickle down to our security forces. One of the key things that the TRC recommended was training. Over the past 20-something years, training was very low on the agenda for the security sector, because obviously we suffered from what we can call sort of a executive capture of the security services, who acted not necessarily, and it's always good to point out that it was not the entire security sector that carried out all these atrocities, but then, as you all know, a single bean is sufficient to make the entire spoon of beans bitter. So that's the effect we have. Training is one of the things that has been recommended. You know, we have very, very good structures for training for the security sector, as international humanitarian law. We have the Geneva Convention on Armed Conflict, which, you know, dictates how soldiers should behave in a situation of conflict. Because although you're in war or you're in conflict, it's important to respect certain rules of conflict. And these came out mainly due to certain isolated events of conflict, like the November 11th attacks and security sector response to attempted coup d'etats. But if you look at it, most of the issues that happened didn't happen in the context of conflict. It happened in day-to-day life. It was civilians going about their normal business. It wasn't a conflict situation. So the TRC recommended that human rights approach should be made central to training for security sector members. Now, when you talk about the security sector, we have the army, we have the police, we have the prisons, we have the fire service, we have the intelligence agencies. Sometimes we ignore the security services broader than just the police and the army. Take, for example, April 10th and April 11th, which is something we celebrated this week. It all started as a result of alleged attacks by the fire service personnel. That was not the army, that was not the police. So we need to recognize that the security sector is broad as well. This year, in the run-up to the elections, with partners such as UNDP, the NHRC, and other stakeholders, trainings were carried out for the security sector in proper crowd response and also in human rights. We believe that if we normalize human rights trainings for security personnel, then they learn that there are different approaches to conflict, there are different approaches to diffusing conflict, different approaches to engaging with the communities in the job they do. One other key area is in terms of proper hiring and proper promotion processes. One thing we saw between 94 and 2017 is meteoric rises. People jumping from sergeants to generals, from lieutenants to generals, without the proper training. If you look at the army, or you talk to security personnel, you know that there are different types of training for different types of members of the armed forces. Because for regimented forces, you have enlisted soldiers and you have officers. And they have different responsibilities, because officers are commanders. And no matter where you go, be it the US or the UK, soldiers, that's enlisted soldiers, are trained to obey commands. They don't have, you know, in-depth and elaborate training in the art of war, the Geneva Convention, international humanitarian law. They're simply trained to follow orders. So what happens when you take a person who's trained to follow orders without questioning and without proper officer training, you put them as commanders? Obviously, it breeds chaos. So that was a very, very key recommendation by the TRC to implement proper hiring procedures and proper promotion procedures. Even before the TRC made this recommendation, it was an issue that was flagged, and work had commenced on the vetting bill. The vetting bill was a bill that was developed through the Office of the National Security Advisor and with assistance from international partners such as DCAF, where we're working on a vetting bill. A vetting bill will lay out proper procedures to vet those going into the army, make sure that they meet certain minimum standards, make sure that their promotion is catered for, make sure that their background checks so that we get the best in the army. We've seen instances, and I think it's been a widespread practice, where people have joined the army with fake documents and even risen to the highest ranks of the army. So the vetting bill is going to address all those issues and ensure that we have proper procedures for hiring into the army and for promotion into the army. I think when we talk about beyond training and beyond vetting, one of the most important issues, I think, is restoring trust. Restoring trust. There is a serious lack of trust between the public and the security services. And interestingly, sometimes there's a lack of trust between the security services themselves and the public. Obviously, that rises from how we conduct ourselves during protests. Because obviously, if you exist for 25 years without a proper channel or proper way to channel your grievance, there's only one way, and which is violence in channeling your grievance. And so there's a need for us to actually work actively, and this is something which the government cannot do alone. We need to work with CSOs, we need to work with the public. How do we restore trust between the security sector and the public? And I think we can do it both. We can do it two ways. One is by bridging the gap between the army and the public, by bringing the army and the security service close to the public, so that we recognize that we all are on the same team and we all have the same agenda, which is working in the interests of the country. But also, another way we can restore trust is by actually earning the trust of the public by carrying out our duties in accordance with the Constitution and in accordance with the rule of law. In America, they say protect and serve. Protect and serve. So the security services are are servants of the public, protect and serve the public. So our belief is, once we are done with all these reforms and the army is now carrying out the role it's meant to carry under the Constitution, then it flows naturally that public trust in the army will be restored without much being done. Additionally, there's a need for reconciliation. There's a serious need for reconciliation because security personnel will continue to work and live amongst us. We have neighbors, we have colleagues who are all members of the security, but then we need to balance reconciliation with accountability because we all know, we talk about maslaha and other things. One of the key reasons why there's a culture of nonchalance or culture of impunity, it will always thrive if there's a lack of accountability. Accountability curbs reoccurrence. So one of those recommendations is reconciliation, but balancing reconciliation with the need for perpetrators to be held accountable. It's like what do they say? Once bitten, twice shy. So once you see perpetrators being held accountable, it acts as a deterrent for further occurrence of violence or other acts against the public. We also need to recognize, as I said at the beginning, that the security sector reform has to be a wholesome approach. It cannot be done in isolation. A security sector reform has to go hand in hand with reforms across the board, be it economic reform, be it social reform, be it cultural reform. Because if you do a security sector reform isolated, while ignoring other very important aspects that might affect security sector reform, then it will be something which we're doing in vain. We just have to look at security officials as victims as well. We saw the witch hunting exercises where the witch hunters were taken to certain police stations or to the military barracks and picked out security officers who were also victims of this witch hunt. We also saw female security personnel who were victims of SGBV. We saw allegations of a particular female soldier allegedly raped 70 times by her superior. So those are issues where we need to approach it from a wholesome perspective. Security sector reform is not solely a government agenda. And if we approach security sector reform from a government perspective, then we might not be successful. Security sector reform is a cross-cutting, multi-sectoral issue. We need to approach security sector reform together with partners. And it's as a result of that, that in the implementation of the TRC recommendations, we've taken a consultative and coordinated approach. Consultative approach one is engaging stakeholders, that is the public institutions like the National Human Rights Commission, engaging the victim-led organizations, engaging the CSOs for their views on these proposals. Because it's one thing for the TRC to propose and for the government to implement, but then you realize that the people who are out there in the public interacting with the victims and interacting with the public have very good ideas about how we can go about security sector reform. So it is very important, and I think going forward, as you've seen over the past 2 weeks, with the launch of the Ministry of Justice CSO coordination platform, and also the Ministry of Justice and the Victim-led Organization Town Hall, all along this process, it will be consultative, where we get feedback from the public and from all the stakeholders in our application of these reforms. Another thing is coordination. There's a need for effective coordination, because if we continue to implement in silos and then we don't take into account the views of other major stakeholders in this process, and then we risk having the process jeopardized. But it suffices to say that the security sector reform is ongoing. But as the chairman rightfully mentioned, there might have been certain setbacks, and the snail pace, as the chairman said, the snail pace. But there have also been a lot of challenges along the line in terms of security sector. One is balancing the need for speedy reforms with the need to ensure and preserve national security. That has been a major challenge. And also the sensitivities, when you look at the structures of the army, the sensitivities of sweeping reforms, which might have a tendency of jeopardizing security through, not to reveal certain sensitive security matters, but security sector reform is best addressed when it is done from a comprehensive and as a gradual process. Obviously, that process of security sector reform was happening parallel to the TRRC process. So there was a need to also see the TRRC process off, so that the recommendations from the TRRC process could be brought on board and put as one unified process. But the good thing with the security sector reform is it's being chaired by the Ministry of Justice, which is not usual. Usually you see security sector reform being chaired either by Ministry of Defense or Ministry of Interior. But then the government thought it was important to get somebody who's outside the security services and who also comes with a background of rule of law and a background of respect for human rights. So the ministry remains ever committed to security sector reform, and I think it has borne fruit by all the trainings we've seen that are happening for the security services. We've seen the vetting and the clearing of the roles of the military, for example, of all impostors in the army, and also just the whole issue of accountability. We've seen a number of prosecutions. We've also seen, for example, recent moves to try to initiate criminal proceedings against certain members of the security services who were crucial in those atrocities that were committed. It's something we are committed to doing, and we are currently working on the white paper. The white paper, according to Section 19 of the TRRC Act, will lay out government's plan of implementation. The process is a consultative process. We have planned a national discussion on the TRC recommendations and findings, which will hold from the 25th to the 28th of this month at the International Conference Center, and we'll have participants from all over the country and from out of the country. That's been organized, thankfully, with the support and participation of the National Human Rights Commission, and with support from our partners like the American Bar Association and the ICTJ, International Center for Transitional Justice. We are also planning a nationwide tour. The minister himself will be going on a nationwide tour, because the feedback we got from a lot of our partners, I think Will is here, Wave is here, Aneket is here. The feedback is the people at the grassroots need to hear from government. The CSOs have been doing a lot going into the communities and talking. But the CSOs are just that, CSOs. The people at the grassroots need to hear from government, and in response, the Attorney General himself will be leading this national tour at the first week of May, and we'll be going around the country, especially hotspots, for example, Sindh and other areas where we had the witch hunt exercises and where we had atrocities that occurred. So that will be happening. We've also sent out a call for position papers, and we're trying to get diverse feedback from members of the public. Interestingly, so far, the feedback we've received is from individuals. It's from just regular citizens. We haven't received feedback from organizations yet, but that is positive in the sense that we show that people are taking an interest. So the feedback from all of this will go into the process of elaborating a white paper, which takes into consideration the views of everybody. So if we do this, and if we believe that the recommendations of the TRRC on security sector reform are strong and bode well for, and with the proper implementation will change the face of the security sector, and we consult and we bring on board all those views, then I have no doubt that things will change. But before I conclude, I just have to state that we could have perfect recommendations, we could have a perfect plan, but it's all about the execution. Without the execution, the best plan could go to waste. So even in the implementation phase, we're also taking a consultative and an inclusive approach, but having everybody on board in the planning and the implementation of these recommendations. We are also lucky that I think the TRRC has recommended that the NHRC should monitor and report to the National Assembly. So, I mean, if that recommendation is taken on board, the NHRC as a neutral player, obviously will be able to hold the government accountable and say, this is what you promised to do, have you done it? And under that recommendation, the NHRC reports to the National Assembly. So we think if all of these different structures are put in place, it bodes well for security sector reform, and we will see the Gambia we want. And the mantra never again will not just be a mantra, but will be a reality. Thank you very much.
We've actually been doing most of our activities with Fantanka, Aniked, and also Wave. Right. So recently we just launched, as Mr. Ta mentioned, the CSO MOJ platform, and this platform is aims to facilitate better coordination so that we do not duplicate efforts. I think this is one of the actually the manifestations of why we did the CSO implementation thing. And this is basically to kind of find out about or assess our strengths and in where we could really be of use. And the MOJ has really been very active and supportive in that. And I think that is what can give us a better and effective implementation of these recommendations. And also talking about effective and proper implementation of these cannot be done in the absence of the relevant stakeholders that are involved, such as the Ministry of Interior, whose representative we have here, and also the Office of National Security Advisor. Unfortunately, we are yet to receive a representative from the National Security Advisor's Office, but invitees and speakers keep coming, so we expect to have them before the end of this. Actually, there's a presentation, and that is coming next, preparedness to carry out reforms after government white paper. And this presentation is actually expected to be done by a representative of the NSA, National Security Advisor's Office, and also the Office of the Interior Minister. Fortunately, we have Mr. Jiba to speak on that from the Ministry of Interior. But before going further, I would also like to just state some things. As a victim, and doing this, I think it is good to reiterate what Mr. Ta mentioned, saying we are all victims, whether you're in the security sector or wherever, we are all victims. And I think at this point, it is clear, quite crystal clear, that the violations that have happened, we have succeeded in establishing and creating an impartial record of these violations. And all they can do at this point is to only continue to haunt us if we do not really take the necessary measures in addressing and moving forward as a country. And we cannot do that by just letting ourselves be on the sides. We must come together, being it victim, perpetrator, or whoever must come together to, first of all, accept. And that is where accountability really would stem from. And I think it is very important to state some of these and to also say these conversations are expected to go on. And the Solo Sandeng Foundation is expected and also will do courtesy calls to various institutions to touch base and so that we're able to implement most of these recommendations and actually effectively do them, not just do recommendations, but effectively do them. Also, I would like to acknowledge our partners and collaborators on the Zoom. They have been a little bit left out, and I didn't want to do that. So we have international coalition of sites of concerns in attendance on the Zoom, as well as Justice Rapid Response. Justice Rapid Response has been a very instrumental and helpful organization to the TJ process. They've given support to the Ministry of Justice in various capacities, for example, in helping to identify mortal remains, especially that of my father. And Catherine Wildhammer is representing, and I want to acknowledge her presence. And also Sophie Fedriani of DCAF, based in Geneva, Switzerland, is also in attendance. And I'd like to acknowledge in-person presence of another member of DCAF in Mr. Irving Vidal. Thank you for coming, Mr. Thank you. Right, so with the participation of all these partners, what we really aim to do is, like I said earlier, is to actually assess where it is needed to bring interventions. And then I think this forum will allow us to do that. And moving forward, we will really, I think this forum will serve as a stepping stone to implementing and also doing effective work, in these areas as mentioned. So without doing much and stopping the much talking that I am doing, I will call on Mr. Jiba from the Ministry of Interior to present on the topic preparedness, government's preparedness to implement security sector reforms after the government's white paper. Mr. Jiba, you have the floor. You want to use the podium? You can. If you want to sit down, you can. All right.
For organizing this important forum on security sector reform with implementation of TRRC recommendations. My name is Abubakar Diamjiba, representing the Ministry of Interior in this forum. And on behalf of the Honorable Minister of Interior and his able permanent secretary, may I once again thank all the participants for participating in this forum. Security sector reform is a very important program for the government of the Gambia. Since this is something that will shape our institutions, that will shape our behaviors, that will shape our activities and programs to impact development in this country. So, for that being the reason, we must all understand the importance of SSR in the Gambia. The ministry's roles and responsibilities in this is overwhelming. Since we are responsible for 5 institutions, including Gambia Police Force, Gambia Immigration Department, Gambia Prison Services, Gambia Fire and Rescue Services, Drug Law Enforcement Agency, the Gambia, Gambia Commission for Refugees. All these are security institutions which have their constitutional mandates, roles, and responsibilities as regards reform imperatives from or directed by the National Security Policy, National Security Strategy, and Security Sector Reform Strategies. And these are key cardinal documents or national documents that must be implemented by Minister of Interior to be able to gain our pace with reform in the security sector area. And that is virtually moving forward. Since the NSP, which is the main overarching policy, has been implemented or has been launched and is on implementation. It's launched in 2019. The 2 strategies were developed in 2020. So the Ministry of Interior is going by these policy directives to ensure the reform happens to the core of its objectives by the government. We have partners supporting the ministry in this area, which is UNDP. We have other partners, DCAF, Geneva Institute, Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance. They are doing a lot in the reform activities of the Ministry of Interior. UNDP has helped or supported the ministry to develop Gambia Police Force Institutional Policy and Gambia Immigration Institutional Policy. DCAF has started and still going with development of operational policies of those institutions. There are SOPs, that is standard operating procedures. For example, in public order management, in investigation procedures, among others. There are a lot. I cannot mention all of them here. Why we are starting with policies, policies guided our programs and activities. They guided our actions and attitudes. Without policies, we are nowhere. In fact, this is what causes illegitimate ruling, irresponsible administrations, irresponsible managements here and there, because policies are not there. And when you look at SSR, it has these key fundamental processes: assessment, review or development of policies, implementation, and then monitoring and coordination of programs and activities. These are core areas of SSR processes. So ministry is gaining its support both within the civil society and the international level, international partners. A lot of our responsibilities or the mandates of SSR has been highlighted by previous speakers. How police should be responsible in implementing law and order. How the ministry should respond to international standards by enacting or ratifying and enacting regional protocols, conventions, and treaties like ECOWAS AU that has been mentioned by a man from NHRC. How they should comport themselves to the standards of those conventions in terms of operating, in terms of delivering public security services, proportionality in the use of force has been highlighted. Most of all these things is interior responsibility as an oversight institution to ensure they are delivered according to those respective protocols or treaties. This is why we are undertaking that robust reform in the policy areas, because without those policies, without those regulations, it would be difficult for Ministry of Interior, security sector to deliver to the core of those mandates. So we are doing a lot in that area after allowing partners to support, partners to direct our visions and missions towards achieving that area. It is unfortunate that I was informed of this meeting today. I would have conceived a lot of those policy areas or frameworks that we have developed with the intervention of those partners to ensure we respond to the mandate of security sector reform undertaken by government of the Gambia. But notwithstanding, some of them are here, those partners are here. Maybe with the extent of time, they might speak around those areas if times allow us. So virtually, this is what I can say in terms of reform. And we know the TRR recommendation or the government white paper will be implemented, because that is nobody's own paper, it is our collective paper. The reform is not for Jiba, neither Samate. It is for the Gambians. If I escape brutality, my family, my relative may not in near future. So as government institution, we are all responsible to respond to the security sector reform agenda. This is for the future of our posterity. It's for the Gambia to support and enhance peace-building mandates of the global community. Security is a fundamental human right issue. If people are not secured, peace cannot reign, development cannot happen. So as a security institution, we know where our roles are, where our constitutional mandates are. This is why we are very responsible and we are very prepared to ensure whatever is people's security, is public security and safety is executed to the core. So for that being the case, I would like to end my speak here, and thank you very much for that wonderful time.
I am not representing the NHRC. I am from the NHRC. My chairman is here to represent the NHRC. So I'll just be delivering some statements. I'll be delivering a presentation on this subject matter, which is increasing the capacity of the police on crowd control and de-escalating situations. This was supposed to be with the police, as I can see on the agenda, but nonetheless, I would proceed with this presentation from my point of view. Several speakers had talked about this, and we, from the chairman's opening statement, he made mention of how important and how significant the right to assembly, the right to freedom of expressions, and all these things are to a democratic state. To ensure democratic dispensation, to ensure people come out to speak out, to ensure people participate in public affairs, it's good these rights are guaranteed. And of course, we have them guaranteed in our laws, in our constitution, which is a very good thing. However, police should also have a say in this, and the police would respond to this, because in accordance with our laws, the police is given the mandate to police assemblies. And looking at where we're coming from, 22 years down the line, from 94 to 2017, a lot had happened. We had seen the way the police and other security institution has been used by our former president to control and, suppress the population. So the mindset remains. It will take time to delete this mindset and to ensure they operate in accordance with democratic values. This would take time, but of course, it's work in progress. And together we can make this thing happen, surely. I just want to first highlight two scenarios. If right now somebody calls the police and report a robbery incident at your door or in your compound, when you are locked inside, within minutes they would respond and they would do the extra mile to ensure these people are arrested, and taken before the courts, which for me is a way of protecting the rights of that individual to property and other rights that might be affected if the robbery happens. But on the other hand, if somebody comes before the police and say, I want to demonstrate, I want to protest because I feel this particular situation is happening and I'm not comfortable with it, it's affecting me, and the state should do something, then the police would frown to this, which is also the protection of a particular right. So what I'm just trying to say here is the mindset when it comes to issues of assemblies, demonstration, and freedom of speech is that these things aren't supposed to be happening. They are seen probably as offenses, I would say, by the state security institutions. Or probably they have been used by the state to control the people not to speak out. Either or is something that needs to be addressed, and we need to talk about this. It could be an issue of capacity. That is, maybe they don't know, but it could also be an issue of authoritarian rule, as we have seen in the previous years between 94 to 2017. Like somebody said earlier, one of the speakers, these people themselves are victims because they have been used to perpetrate serious human rights violations. And this would, of course, affect the people that are committing these violations themselves. I come from a policing background. I have been in the police and I have been training police officers. So I know a lot where the lapses are when it comes to public order management. And the previous speakers had spoken a lot about that, ranging from the recruitment, selection, and promotion issues, how people were being recruited, and all those things contribute, because I was in the center of all these training people that are brought in. And you can see how difficult it is when the wrong people are brought for you to train. Certain people, you look at them and feel they are untrainable no matter what you do. So which goes down to say that they came in using the wrong way. If they had gone through the procedures, so we.
Guys, that interruption was necessary. Please join me to welcome Madam Jai, Madam Noe Jai. As most of us will know, she was part and parcel of members of the protest group that were arrested with my father. They staged this protest on that fateful day, April 16, 2016, and they were arrested and brutally tortured. And we can all see how she struggles to get in here on her feet, and that is really a torturing thing. And so, completely, that is just a testimony of how damaging these violations are. This is police brutality. This is state security brutality. And so this is exactly what we are talking about.
Because issues of increasing capacity, normally there's a need for capacity needs assessment, or you may call it training needs assessment, to know where the capacity gaps are so that you will discuss on increasing the capacity on certain areas. However, in our situation, you don't really need to do that to be able to realize the capacity gaps when it comes to public order management by the police in the Gambia. Recalling some of the incidents that happened, April 10, we have seen what happened. We were all witnesses to this. I remember April 10, I was still going to school and I was in grade 10. So I was part of the demonstration and I've seen how it happened. Also, of course, April 14, the incident we are commemorating here, calling on a reform of our electoral laws, which I believe is something that we would have all wanted to do. So when somebody had volunteered and sacrificed to do it, that was a good thing. So we had seen what happened there, and it resulted to the loss of life. We can also recall the Faraba Banta incident, where youths of a particular village came out to demonstrate and protest on some harmful effects of the mining to their environment. We can remember the April 3 years Jotna, which is, of course, just very recent. We can also remember the demonstration against the anti-crime. And on the same day, there was also another demonstration in Birkama happening the same day on the death of one Usman Dabo of the Serekunda market. We can remember the Sanyang incident where the youths of the village came out to protest and burn down the Sanyang police station and of course the fish meal factory that is situated in Sanyang. And we had seen how things had unfolded. But we had also seen the recent incident that happened in Birikama, where somebody was brutally and mercilessly beaten by members of the Gambia Police Force, PIU to be specific. All these things are instances that you can use as a yardstick to conclude that there are capacity gaps when it comes to police in public assemblies in the Gambia. But also, other issues that we can use are our complaint management, our complaint mechanism as NHRC, some of the complaints we received, like our chair earlier alluded to, but also revelations during the TRRC. You have had the revelations and some of the things that you never could think that is happening in the Gambia were happening and were perpetrated by our own people. And looking at the recommendations from the TRRC, of course, they had gone through a process, investigated, know what the root causes are, and made their recommendations on some of this. And one of those recommendations, like the previous speaker, Mr. Ta, stated is training for security forces. So these are things you look at and come to the conclusion that there are capacity gaps. And of course, where there are capacity gaps, you need to devise ways of increasing the capacity in those areas. And in the specific area we are talking about here is in the area of public order management, crowd control. I just want to talk about few other success stories, probably, which could make us think on how better we can do things. We remember the victim center demonstration. Victim center, there was this demonstration by the victim center when certain people in the country started calling for the return of the former president. So this demonstration I had gone to monitor and I was impressed with the way it happened. It happened smoothly and everything went fine. So which means we can do things better. We just need to address some issues and things would be better. There was this attack at Serekunda police station. A mob came out and they attacked Serekunda police station. And the police struggled to handle this, but a certain honorable Halifa Saleh came out and was able to move the crowd and disperse them alone. So this clicks, why are the police also not using some of these influential people to help when it comes to crowd? There are people that everybody listens to, and they can just come and all these things are provided for in the guideline for police in public assemblies that our chairman referred to when he was making his speech. So we also remember the Operation 3 Years Jotna, the initial demonstration, the first one. The crowd was too much, but it was done peacefully. The good practice to pick from this was, during that period, the police that was in charge of operations at the headquarters, I remembered, had several meetings and communications with the 3 Years Jotna executive before this. So a lot of things were put in place, and for me, we give credit to those discussions, those meetings, and those communications. That was why that first one went on successfully without violence. Unfortunately, the second one was something we could not brag about, yeah? So, looking at this, we would start thinking, why are we having these repeated issues of police brutality? Why are we having heavy-handedness by the police when it comes to public order management? Why is there excessive use of force by the police when there is public order management every time? Okay, in majority of instances. One, you could look at it as the wrong mindset, like what I tried to illustrate at the beginning. The mindset is this person coming to demonstrate against the government What is it saying? Why do you stand up and say anything against the government? Who are you to say anything against the government? You can also attribute it to poor capacity, insufficient training on public order management for law enforcement officers. If there was proper and sufficient training, probably some of these things would not have happened. In the case of Faraba and on previous incidents of public order where excessive force was used, you could attribute it to the lack of sufficient equipment. This could be also attributed. And of course, issues of police accountability was a big problem. In those days, you cannot come out and say anything against the government. The police would use force and nothing would come out of it. We have seen investigations that were stopped or jeopardized just because it has, the police or whoever had done what he had done had the backing of the government or the president at the time. So nothing would come out of it at the end of the day. So there was no accountability and they can do anything and go scot-free. So this could also be factors that contributed to what we are looking at today. So looking at all this, what do you think is what is needed now? I have here, we need to review the police training curriculum. We really need to go back and look at what the police training curriculum has and how are they conducting their training programs, especially on the aspects of public order. I remembered when I was an instructor at the training school, we had this module on public order management, but honestly speaking, that one we had at the time was completely outdated. And when you use that here, it was not effective. But of recent, we had seen a lot of trainings happening on public order, modern techniques of public order management, which if we adopt and use, honestly, there will be a difference. Something is also needed to increase the capacity of the police, and that is we review the recruitment, selection, and promotion policies. This is important because this determines the type of people and the caliber of people that are coming into the police. And we look at public order as something that you just need the energy to move people around, but no, it needs a lot of sound judgment to be able to make the right decisions when it comes to public order management. So anybody that is recruited into the police force should be that level so that they can determine what level of force should I use at this or what technique do I use right now to ensure this situation is sorted out. We need to develop POM policies. I would just say, Chair had referred to the code of conduct that we had helped the police develop. But apart from this code of conduct, we also had helped them develop the guideline on policing assemblies in the Gambia. And our inspiration, we draw inspiration from the guideline on policing assemblies in Africa. It's human rights friendly. It's a very good one. What we should advocate for now and push for now is for them to start implementing this guideline and maybe to prepare SOPs in accordance with this guideline, and we will call this thing to rest. But one document, that is my opinion, that I feel is derailing the efforts is the Public Order Act. Looking at it, it has been here since 1961. So we know it's obsolete, it's archaic. So we should put it aside and have a new one that is addressing our current realities and not using that one, which I believe was used by other people just to suppress and colonize us. So we have a lot of opportunities in this, and that is one, there's already an existing guideline on policing assemblies. I know for certain that there's the available human resource capacity to train officers of the Gambia Police Force on public order management techniques. I mean, at the tactical level, on how to move around and the drills. I know for certain that there is that human resource capacity within the police. It's not very far, just within the police, it's existing. But I also know that there is the NHRC and other institutions that could come together and build the capacity of the Gambia Police Force, especially in the field of public order management. Because right now in the Gambia, with the current state of affairs, we'll be seeing a lot of protests and demonstrations. That is democracy. We need to embrace this. So, hence, this is democracy. Hence, this is what we yearn for, and we have it now. So, we should build the capacity of the institutions of the Gambia to be able to also facilitate this, so that we can have a peaceful country. Yeah. So, the other things I had here were just some of the provisions that are in the guideline on the policing assemblies, which if we train the police on, we would really be increasing their capacity when it comes to policing public assemblies. So I was alerted earlier that it's time, so I would stop here for now.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Ya boy turbi?
Tom no go enjayati. To mandinare.
Tay ñu ñëw fekk la ci li nga xamantene modi bésu ki nga xamantene modi Solo Sandeng tay lu wara sa téway? Lu wara sa téway tay ci bésu ki nga xamantene modi ndem ci Yalla Solo Sandeng?
Solo Sandeng nak sama xarit la daanaka mën naa wax ne sama famille la ndax su ma gisul benn fan ñaareel fan de mu ñëw si yow man gisuma man tam noonu la dama jógee sama kër gi ñëw si moom waxtaan ak moom ba géete sof ñu doog a tasaaru du ñuy waxtaan la lu suñu politique ak suñu famille ak réew mi loolu rek ne moo nekk suñu waxtaan bi solo nag moom ku baax la si man ku am yërmande la si man en tant que jigéen la solo nag moom daanaka daf may aar moom aaram si politique sama xarit bu baax la dafa bëgg te yàlla tax man tam noonu laa ko bëgg comme sama mag bu góor bu nga xamante ne ñoo bokk ndeeg bay ñun mujjee bi politique nekku suñ diggante mbokk yaa bi moo nekk suñ diggante dama ko miin trop parce que victime bi yenn saa yi man du ma fa dee dem ndax saa yu waxee turam bi kay moom sama xel bi day sori wax ni ma melax moom benn bés la ñëw ci man mu ne ma Nogoy mu ne ma ne ko aha mu ne dañu war a am interparty meeting ma ne ko seen interparty meeting yooyu kay moom déggu waxu xamu ko lépp parce que man jànguma waaye man ëllëg su ma xeere dama war a dem uti garab bi si pour sama yaay diabetes high blood ñu ne garab bi Westfield pharmacie ñoo ko dee am ndax benn rool time boobu dafa manqué te bokk na si garabam yi mu ne ok ci boor boobu la ñu dem dañuy dem taxaw Westfield Johnson rek da xam tuuti li ñuy waxtaane rek because I see time am bi jeex na pour ñu sensé ko diggante Sénégal ak Gambie xam nga dañuy tëj boodam man ko aha man ma dañuy ñaan gouvernement bi pour ñu ubbi boodam bi ndax loolu moo indi solo ci suñu dëkk réew mi loolu noonu la amul dara loolu man ko loolu du problème man ko buñ xëy rek mu ne ma léegi dangay waxtaan ak sa gars yi même ñetti ñeneenti nga ànd ak ñoom ngeen jël moto bi ñëw soo ñëwee ñu delloo la seen paas bi man ko du problème soo ma wax Malan Sadio Max ñoom Tamba Kanté Abbas yaakaar naa ñooñu laay àndal daal ñu ñëw fekkalan ci yoon bi ñu ngi ñëw man leen léegi meeting bi jeex na ñu ne ma jeex na foofu la ñu dem nii boobu dañ demoon man Njaay bureau ñu léegi dañuy continuer dem si feri Johnson bi ma lay wax noonu man na ko ok kon nañ jël alfaatiha ñu dem parce que njullit yi soo leen dajee ñaari ñetti nit loolu mënut a def rek moom da ngeen jiitale yàlla ñu def loolu alfaatiha noonu la ñuy wàccee dem bu ñuy demee ñu bare yegg si sama moto yi parce que oto bi feesul ndax ñoom ñu dem ba ñu àgg place bi Westfield ñu taxaw foofu am na ñu bari ñoo xamante ne foofu la ñu fekkee am na ñoo xamante ne ñun fekk na leen foofu buñ àggee ba foofu ñuy commencé di waaye anglais la ñuy làkk te man jàngum man tam maa ngi topp benn waaj bi Faké Bakoli kooku yal na ko yàlla yërëm moom gaañu na ma ne ko Faké Ba ma ne ko fu mu ne nii kay man damaa bëgg a naan sax su ma xamoon sa moom affaire bi du gaaw ne ko noonu dama jëlee bouteille ndox bi kay moom dugg si moto bi Faké Ba daal di ma jox $20 mu ne ma jëndal ndox bi ci booy bi ma jox booy bi daal di uti weccet bi ma ne ko léegi damay war a continuer dem Banjul parce que garab bi aw ma ko fu ma jëkkoon a dem aw ma garab bi foofu noonu ñu ne garab bi daa jafe dama jox lettre bi pour ma dem Banjul pharmacie dinaa ko am foofu ma jox $20 ci booy bi jox ko ma ne ko jox ko driver jox ko $10 boobu beneen bi ma def ko paas bi pour dem pharmacie Banjul ndax weccet bi amul xale bi jox ko driver bi $20 xam naa ne driver bi sax moom dafa dem ak xaalisam foofu noonu ñu gis moto bi daal di toppalante virtu di ñëw man ko ñii de xaw ma fan la ñuy dem tey lu xew ma gis suñu gars yi kay moom ñi ñëpp tasaaroo ñu daw man maa ngi taxaw parce que xaw ma lan moo war a daw boobu noonu ndax ñii li ñuy wax loolu jarul sax moom kenn daw léegi ma taxaw ñetti sordaal ñoom sordaal lañu dañuy sol seen uniforme ñu taxaw si nga Westfield yow waa fi nga Westfield boo taxawee foofu gis nga kii bi fu ndox bi jaalee noonu ci gannaaw bi ama benn garab bi taxaw nekk foofu la ñoom ñu taxaw moom taxaw ci koto tali bi ñu ne ma jigéen bi na nga def ma ne ko maa ngi fi rek yow politicien nga ma ne ko lu tax nga may laaj lool mu ne ma yow kan nga support ma ne ko loolu taxul ma ñëw fii lu tax nga may laaj xanaa lii yow affaire politique la loolu moo tax ñuy daw nii ñu ne ma waaw ma ne ko I'm not right to support any other parties ñu ne ma hakay ma ne ko loolu nga def loolu ma laajee si loolu mu ne ma dama dugg si moto bi ma ne ko ku support parti bi kay moom UDP ñoom ñooy dugg fii ma ne ko man mënu maa yegg si moto bi ndax time boobu sama yaram bi dama diis waaw ñu ne sordaay benn keneen ki ñëw kooku mu ngi Banjul ndi Lamin Sane la tudd mu ne sordaali kaay la ngeen dimbale kii mu yéeg si moto bi bi ñu yéegee si moto bi ma gis ku ñu jàpp rek ñu sànni ko ci moto bi ndax li ñu la sànni lu tudd dañuy sànni ni comme saymat léegi ma gis ñu indi ay ñoom Fatoumata Jawara ñu bare nag ñu seen leen ñëw fii foofu Fatoumata ñu bare ñu sànni leen ci kaw Fatoumata Jawara ma ne ko bu leen gaañ doomi jàmbur man de Fatoumata jógal ma daal di koy dimbale di koy yëkkati mu jóg ma ne ko toogal fii ma ne ko Fatoumata lan la parce que dama leen di gis ngeen nekk di wax man waaye xaw ma lan ngeen di wax boo leen ma dugal si histoire pour problème ne mu ne ma déedéet li ñuy wax ni kay moom loolu rek lay def loolu moo tax ñu ma ne ko moo tax man leen kii pour dem def ko leneen loo xamante ne kii loo leen groupe rek mu ne yéen a ngi bëgg a kuddi la foo leen groupe rek lu muy xalaatee mooy gars yi dañ ko dee wax ne gars yi dañuy groupe ni may dégg ñuy wax sa tur bi coup d'état la ñu bëgg su booba da nga am problème te ñun defuñ ku amul bale amul bant amoo paaka nan ngay defee coup d'état borom fetel yi ak borom garnaaj yi ak borom lu bare lu gën a garaaw ñoom ñu ngi ko yor ku nekk ak sa full uniforme ñu dugg moto bi dem ñu escorte ñu dem dugg piyaayu buñ duggee foofu ñu ne ñu wàcc ci moto bi ñu wàcc ci moto bi ñu def rang ñaar rang ñun ñu nekk seen diggante bi kay moom ñu topp ñu dem ba piyaayu office foofu noonu benn salle bu mag la moo gën a rëy fii nag ñu ne ñu toog si suuf man ne ko may leen ma duus ma dem sawtañu man ma dem saw ñu ne ma fii mooy dus bi ma dugg foofu dem saw ñëw toog ñoom Fatoumata nga jooy ma ne ko Fatoumata loo leen jooy loo leen def ba jooy lii jarut jooy di ma ne ko lii jarut jooy nañu xaar lu ñu ooyee kay moom ñu waxtaan ak ñoom léegi ñu toog seen ministre ya keneen ki ku topp ci ministre la xaw ma keneen ki ñëw parce que xaw ma leen ñu toog boobu foofu noonu ba mu yàgg keneen ki ñëw mu wàcc ci moto bi rek moom gars yi commencé di ko salut mooy Ousmane Sonko bu ñëw mu ne where are those people loolu la dégg naa ko ñu daal di koy escort ñëw ba fu may taxaw mu ne this woman am dem loolu dégg naa si waxam bi loolu jàpp naa ko mënuma koo fàtte waaw saane ne ko moom Lamin saane ne ko is a leader is follow solo Sandeng is a leader kaay ko man tam ma ne ko dangay fen waxoo dégg dangay fen mu ne ok dinaa leen tëj lisin man na ko yàlla tamit dina la tëj lisin yow noonu la demee ak gaay yëpp topp ko gaay yëpp topp ko ñu dem.
Yeah, so what we are going to do, please, we have to stop this, all right?
Okay.
Yeah, and continue.
Nen alalu min be nata ka ben jam pour ko ñoo hakilo la comme ka ko mo ñu kuta yandilam doron mediyamula victime wol be to yala bari ne ko yare mbal be diamu kan bawo solo la ko mo ne ngadi diamu ko mastro kan niyo ka selendi bak en to lañu victime center ñi a folo tante ñame wala ñenti ko arami salon arbalu solo na tan kan anin fake ba ko li anin lang be bir kama lam maron ñin nata je anin lamin cham anin lamin bir kama lamin jata kabiri nata ayatara ko be konton la fam nata fonye ko tul man lo dal be hawjer ne bita ko be simela nga konton gulan tata e wala nata fonye ko sama nga programme mo so min keta interparty meeting ngol do ko ngol fo ni angale kan ngol kara mo li non bugal la ka dum don kara sain e ko nyako mbita min tole ko mbita la folo la bureau to manjay nimbota manjay don mbita lola silo la kandron min be mbulu ngafo ko mun e bale bulu ko wala min IC ala time bantale do masakunda ba derin ima falen lafta nga ya falen se carte fayo tilin ngi soto ani Senegal ni Gambia bodo mi ya sorong mbite dani la police bodo yele ba wala mun to la problème o ten to la domorol fengol bi ka bonani Senegal ngo de o manke fenti hani ngale tro sa fengo ki ngam nyento jabi ngadi na IC la min keta Suleiman Diouf ngam sar habari mbengata isalon ko nyimmu Gambia be la sulul ono problème te fango silo to bi kata banjol ko sumba ma e diabetes to ani high blood so fongo ta wala boro nyini nyanta nyin lay ko Westfield pharmacy nimma be soto yedo mbitala banjul pharmacie ngata nyini ngi ko parce que no ngabenje ko mbitala banjul janale Westfield so nimboto yedon tebe fulo jila pharmacie nol tatam bureau to bi nga moltare bi ipare ji kan nangi ko e mitino kala katu metal batulan ko ha to nyalti ko sani nga fatiyata katu misil mo be fen kel dol ka fulo ka ala tan dal nyato ma fatiyata don jita bi jita nata bulan moto kono modul bulata je mo jamal bi dabni ko bitani singol la dol tata ni singol la nata ta fon futa Westfield pharmacie donc alin to batunga aljindi jang bawo janon ni jon so to mulbe dame ko han kum baltara je nga mbamal boro nyini folo nga nyini nga dikal finance soto nga hydrome nga bor si fafula soto bal benro ma wosoto saye kayto safe otumo benro ni mankitale e kayto safe ya na loptano to je e pharmacie to je ko nyita bañun pharmacie ibadi la mola je min to bi jang ya di ala be vendor ni wa flavor nata nan ko say mbatu ngana mitino ni aten jang ibe min fola ba ngala manta time tal after se continue ngata min boro ni sanna na risito be mbulo kono ani na kodo be mbulo kono nata ta foje mu fota ngam tare be bendinje fana be lota je ko mala moto park mala sadio wala ko ta drive foti kay moto park ngani aten ni parta do nga continue ngata banjo yemin fonte manni ka kangoto ko lafta pour ICF change moko angale kan fono comme mini akarambare ye wala fo angale kangoto ha sai wo fulol drong fo jarata pour kam momu takata liba nyinda ma nyenefo mole nyindo be nganda se o dam malakan sai mbije sojer sababe lorin o jiyo kabordami akoma sojer sababe lorin je eni la info mo bar kittebul fentebul e ko nyako muso system konna ita ka pati jamana sabot kay fo len siya halu fon fo amay no right to support any of the party ako nyako haka you have right ngai so ngawala ke ita nyin kawala minute ako awa tabula yi moto kon ko what do you mean tabula yi moto kon fo ni min be yudi bi parti wol nyanta bula yi moto kon ako hay mo nyol bi jela ndum dol be tala jel belo ren noto madam ko kata ganda bala ko to sane nata womu police fo superintendent lo famino ko sanala buton de jamal kabir nganata ako itele min ko beti bawo ngani fo solo nyolel pour yin so ko cancel nkai mun ko be kere woto ni wol ma fo nyete na fo nyeba katun timana min be kere aljanjang nkai moli la pameto da kumine ko bi da ke bita mol janjang non nkana mi fo yolal kanu ndata te bon telo ndala akoke atata paral ngaji ni buro kana ani moto kana atata botan ko to fa seita fata talo dulalo to malo be kol paral ni moto na tan ja halta ngamra ko fellobe ko mon ko auto batun tanga sey ko ka to paral ni buro min kana sa keno fendol ket yalla fe kanam fanglo wala kabri nata don ilota ibe mul bayle be timpala be fayla moto ko be mul solo imate moto o lota je because atebulata moto ko no la tabortal min bente dala lori wole solo dula foye tata kamanan inata aya tara indrubal ne moto ko len sama piayo mi sirim piayo ko si du non tangi dali jon ko lan tata jon ko to natan sita fatuma tol be kumbola fatu kamaro lo ko alide mbe mi banko dingolti mimbe kela mbajela le mimbe fola mba moyla tay mbe ngande ngalla moy iko la ke bale batu ko ke bam nyamate ko le ministre kambando na ta paral mo fola ko nyako mero ko na akonya ali fanyo di amol don sai na ke bal kanana nana ta be di amol don ay se nyi manke problem ti maybe ya fa nyame wolo na mbisirin ko bisimila bije ngaje moto tiyo na ta lota bili mo tiyo lota ke o jita ji anala informul butongul karamul dawda balo be ni butong kabri nga foto ya why are those people anyine folof nte kay ko wole to mu jamaati Allah misal to mu jamaati akonya usman sonko kay okay awul tan kay wulindala ta tita lokol katu janni kala hajotinya mbiye do ngaji kabri saluta ni aba fala way ade be wodi amol fola ngalo ngata jibeten ay jiyon kay den a ko jiji ngalo ko nyino so fanasi is this woman among them sane kay ko is a leader and solo Sandeng and nyin e wolle fo je nyin ko me lorin sirin ko majen falan sonko kon tolum lidalti kay wallahi amno to leader muna ne be introduce la wonyam foyte intro no katunte metalo sanyin tenata iko ngobulam yembe wulindi iko ngata na talo bana samana bana mi yana bana ko tole fa wulay nata mi fena iko ngawuli nga amutan tani modungo pour yenna natal ko mi be safere nga bala ma lon tan nata kata tu lo do normalti ni ngan natal ni fi ala ko jo ko je sa fo no ko fa ngol ya ak ala fo nyara karangalo mi bi inata karang okay wo fana man ke fenti ngabondo ngoma ya mutante ngamutal lota yen nata yembul fulota ya city ya hankof ponta bula moto kon yemmodu ngom fana hankof kayta bula moto kon anen karamundo dini school boys fula tene wala tata nyol paral sita ten dol sita ten ten sam atra min ko where are those people ako ko okay dalen tiglesin okay ha ngata ay sen tiglesin ala fana se tiglesin imbrani moto la wala nyama isam biden talan tanga amran kata mile tule ntata fon tamita mile 2 dala ko ha into kata mile 2 mo kata dam auto mon telma no ena e fon be dami ma fon ni banko kam yen samba fo i kofta bunda do la ngamoy bimbe sirin dala se Omar Dieng aba fala ko open the gate we are to come in so kabirin kata don yalon angale kan unta fo no ko karanalu bar gambia dingo ne dol fe be wol fo xam le kamen fo e bunda ngatre bunda yele na so moto kofta solo sanena moto be nyaato nte bano kan dunda konoto e bunda so ron ko take mo mandulaji ko take ko to lembe konoto berin futata e jindi e solo tambindi tata sama rumdo kon e container jam nde dun taji ko ngombulol tampen na be tam yembalo wiste ko fu safol be mbalani fen yembalo wiste safu kili yotara malawo safo kabin sumbuto ndimama ke malawo be mbala ko ko mesa fo sile mena kamene be ke fo mi da safo sile e ko yemi be ke ri malo ko hani e ko ke balo nan ko bismillah mbe siri lori ngi tul ko ndoje ke ba do nata nalta sabay jang ke ba jang lom ten e ko nyoko topal ki bo la nom bo la ke ba no kan ntata pour ka sel step do kan no ko nyoko mbata kan nga jeli kay way ite ke baba ite yemu so jinin kala wala do dem tak la se jawa bo la to wala nyamu nata to bun ko nga muskilin tar sirinje o fanan office do kula lam na kay problème so to ya mabo je la mul maji atada mam siri ngade tar sirinje nga konton wo fay meta jang ko ha min kete la kabri ngati ya ko nya ima ke fenken ima fe fonye folo mi sirinje wol nya man kay wati je ke ja ko nyimbe na lokum fula jang la ko la ja ini mo man tar ka cala jang ko hay dam ma ko ha ko alamuta ko ya moy la ko han kay be ngan dunodi alale man sa talla min ka jongo fasa nata fintina nata ke banda fintina en samadula do to bahamal biji kofta bahamal lan kofta ten en samadula do ay sindiji office wolum je fanata commune tamul beten pourquoi inda fi yanni nin kan ko man felonje man fanyi jenero mbal mi be kede malo e kon tele kon kata inda fatimitin la adu sai altol ale min kacha jennal kanan kay ngamin kacha ko han ko mon fen kacha foni nan tol ya kacha jenne bari ni mon lon fen kacha do nata ko nyako yen degen deger fit degen nani kani wa ñu ñola ngena nani kani mon ko getaw ke balaba I have to dun ko wayan dun ko min dun ko be mbala nyami atata ke ko yolom atata amita anata mun nan kan waxo fi dara ñu ko ben bobu rek la mo wax da ngay wax so waxul fi da ngeen xamne ñun ñola ngena nani kani togal la ngeen gis man ko yow sama soxo bi kay mo yow do Gambian yow lo si do xam nga lan la sori ma bi problème Gambia du Gambia pro Sénégal sori ma demal wa ok dina ñu dem na ko rek ko kay wuyu wulta ko tege ke ba kilimo mi yambo nan o bun kono kana sama reception to kana o ke ba kilimo nalta sabo be nyaata ko tege ay samba tatan soron e bundo yele ko ngadunje ndun taji bundo yele ko ngadunje bun saba ya belo wa bare alfa ay nda soro jango hal criminal ko kasaron tan ciabu saba mbe sirinje just 5 and 10 minutes mo sifam ina tan iko nyako barke ba fulo min nga itaje nimbe fintila wol ke ko dite ye nyabi ngalo mollo min yellong e malla fe ngi suute mo wol suute yen fintindi nan iko nyako topal xale bi kam mano le tamma wato kam man dingo kam man min dingo ram dal ay samma fo ngotata bu njango ko na sodo ten dula bi je wo comme place malum ten birim futata yedo ngomol tar ye beni masko futata mina do ko be faano kala nyaato manson so ni tata o nyama kusan pul butu kan jungu pour peño la be ñoo fa del ni tanitol because soto mon defana ba kata kan kam fan kanandi idol ba kata kan pour kamote mamutano so ni tata wala no wulo me ala to kumanda don ba mo moji je ngami sute tata wala nya la bangala do be ko ma julo fay yewo fu drum musandi ta wala nyama nyepitan kan dole en kan muta ya ngaji tan nyabe santo jubela dole en bulol muta dole en tema muta dole en suma muta so yen sama silande ko silo dijete fo babala yen sama je yen sindi boto badi amado mbe ala ganna ke ba do nata sutuma ko nyako hanise wuru jang mo ke wuru kan mo jang kay bal ala ka moy konya yo si abata na bini ma ko ja go wallahi bina ma ko la bari je tata ngaji ñin ñepetan kan fu kam busandi wo mo kilangal lam because kabiri ñepete kan ngela de masko wa fu ñaato nge ñaadal jela ngalo wolum ñamata wolum tamba man sarenti anin fenge susol kata something like because ida malka nyoto kumande ñe nyoto kumande ko tol mutale be kanyina wol to ngawuli nga oton tebe ta kan solo be damin to ngade be solo ñinin ka kan iba ankes kan solo ñin adiyama doron haruna su solo folo bota je ata solo tulo bu sa pawa kay da soron ngalon haruna su solo ni solo sande solo ya no baken bar bawi kafu jamalum tol mo flo de malbe te ibulu wato oto mo ñin doni wala soron ni kaso ko e mo wala fintindi ina tan sambaje ye wulinde duma ko kaya so le jembe sirin duma ina ta wulinde en samba dula to mi yalan ko adula ni open place lam e table ta yelandi sum musol musu saba fanani wala sirin sirin ka wol tin so be buri ba mi sum ko tollo bari be do ko la jira ngalo e peni la busol ila tamama sanin folo ko ila ngani ila se ko fen ko jabo ngani sen ko jabo nga ente manke jabati balam jaboti ke ko fonte nga fo ite minati to mon sel le malo ko halama dum mo ba ba sen halama dum ibalam jaboti wala ni ya saranka ako studied ni mo groupe le ni dal be faale so ko min ngalla dol be mbulo muta dol en sen muta man solal o fanan keta keloti mu warta bakente ni tem foy mbusande ni tableau be busanda so tableau nyin ala kuliya man nyin si kabiri be woli palo ngo tableau ta nga fay kan ni tableau be fay kan be busandita wulta ko nga kelo mamandi ni tol kalli pale kende ke ni la busol nga mina buso nyin mutado nga sey ndila ni ndo do ta muta nga fay kan karan kan santo ni tata wallahi sita famin tor ni be kelka ko kola min be contrôler je dul ba fal 1 2 3 dul ba fal 1 2 3 dul ba fal e kon siko ba sifeji yalla wol be man ken to la kamolti yo inata fa ko excuse do la bu sol ni tan kondi lo len so solo fenke aduna suso ko kola bente o lipo kambiri ko excuse do nata solo je ya fintindina ya jannin jammuta inata fe yalandi e kayela ko solo mune atin ne ba sonne lala kabiri bungo ko non ko kana son no kana wura el kana son pasai ni mo kilingo mo tan saba mo tan nan be lote ko e nyinke foyake mo kala fa kala ko mo sen ka dingol bi jang al se hekatu baki o wato le nata nyapiya kan kay solo tumu
we will have to cut this regulation because they are very emotion charging, and the effects of the discussion, the motive of this testimony was basically to highlight the psychological and physical effects of these violations. And
mo solo ba kan fay te ba kan fay te nyebita bulu kan ka saba ba fale ko haruna su jira ngam min akay kata da min dalo bi jel a jabi wol haruna kata da min jidalo bi se wol
If you want to receive monies from UK, Europe, USA, Canada, Switzerland, and the rest of the world, Supersonic's money transfer has got you covered. With the largest payout network in the Gambia, you can now receive your monies anywhere you are, from Kartong to Koina, with less hassle. Yes! You can receive monies from your family and friends in UK, Europe, USA, Canada, Switzerland, and the rest of the world with our safe, secure, fast, and convenient service that offers you the largest selection of payout locations in the Gambia. Supersonic's Money Transfer. We are currently in 34 African countries and counting, giving you quality money remittance services that are second to none. Visit the Google Play Store or the Apple Store today to download the Supersonic's Money Transfer app and enjoy excellent money transfer services only with Supersonics.